Are you tired of browsing thrift stores and coming home empty-handed? Well, in today's video, I'll be using 10 common thrift store items suggested by viewers that you can easily find at even the junkiest of thrift stores. And I'll be transforming them into stunning fall decor. I've got ideas for everything from coffee mugs and picture frames to pots and pans. So if you want to see how we can turn ordinary thrift store finds into extraordinary home decor, let's get started.
Thrift store shelves are full of cheap plastic items that most of us pass by, but you might want to consider buying plastic wall clocks. The one I bought was only $1.84. To repurpose your clock, remove the screws on the back side. This will release the plastic ring that holds the glass in place. Then pop off the clock hands and remove the nut that holds the clock mechanism in place. You can save all the clock parts to use on a different project if you want. To make the clock frame look less like plastic, give it a couple coats of chalk paint. You might want to add some baking soda or salt wash to the paint to add some texture. Be sure to reattach the plastic ring to hide the screw holes. I purchased this heavy cardboard moon cutout from Dollar Tree. I popped off the witch and sanded off most of the design. To cover the moon, I tore up some mostly blank paper pages from an old textbook. The pages were a creamy color that I thought was perfect for a moon. When decoupaging on cardboard, it's important to apply a very light but even coat of Mod Podge to avoid wrinkles and bubbling. After adhering each paper strip, I used my paintbrush to smooth out the paper and apply another light coat of Mod Podge over the top. Once the Mod Podge is dry, use a utility knife to cut off the extra paper around the edges. Then smooth over the edges with sandpaper or a sanding block. As I was playing around with the placement of the moon on the clock, I decided to hot glue the clock hands to the clock face, and I used an upholstery tack to cover the hole in the center. If you're going for a Halloween theme, you could point the hands at midnight. Then hot glue the moon shape to the clock frame. I was going for an autumn theme, so I pulled a branch of flowers from a thrift store arrangement, but you could create your own small arrangement by using florist tape to join a few floral stems together. Due to the wire in the stems, you can arrange them behind the moon so that they stay in place without using any hot glue. I printed an autumn quote on another piece of paper, then cut it into individual strips and glued them to the clock with Mod Podge. I drew pencil lines on the moon to make sure that I applied the words straight. If you prefer, you could use a Halloween phrase and use the witch and a black cat cutout instead of flowers. If you repurpose silk florals like I do, you can trim up any edges that are looking raggedy, or if they're really bad, just cut them off entirely.
I like to start my day with an energy boosting breakfast, but it has to be super easy. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Magic Spoon. Every serving of Magic Spoon cereal has 13 to 14 grams of protein and only 4 to 5 grams of total net carbs. And here's the real kicker: 0 grams of sugar. I seriously don't know how they do it because it is absolutely delicious. It tastes just as good as those breakfast cereals with tons of added sugar. And it comes in a huge variety of flavors like cocoa, fruity, peanut butter, cinnamon roll, and my personal favorite, frosted. I like it with milk, but it also makes a great topper for yogurt or a mid-afternoon snack just on its own. If you'd like to try Magic Spoon cereal, use the code Canterbury or click the link in the description and you'll get $5 off. Magic Spoon is so sure you'll love their cereal. It's backed by a 100% happiness guarantee online. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So just use the QR code on the screen or the link in the description box to go to magicspoon.com/Canterbury and get $5 off.
Many of my viewers say that their thrift stores always have a lot of picture frames. And today I actually have 2 ideas for upcycling ugly frames. This $3 frame didn't even come with a piece of glass. To neutralize the paint color of your frame, paint it with whatever brown or green paint that you have on hand. While the paint is drying, take a walk around your neighborhood or a nearby park and collect small bits of nature. I picked up acorns, sticks, and small pine cones, all from the street while walking my dog Edgar. At first, I thought I might try adhering them to the frame with wood glue, but right away I realized that hot glue was going to work much better. I started by attaching the larger pieces first, and it wasn't looking very promising, but I just kept filling in around them. For fun, I added a scarecrow head that I broke off a resin figurine in a video last year. Then I began filling in the gaps with fluffy reindeer moss. It mostly stayed in place without glue. I only used hot glue along the frame edges. The scarecrow head seemed out of place with the woodland elements, so I pried it off. And I found a tiny owl in my stash to use instead. I think he looks perfect among the moss and pine cones. For the inside of the frame, I printed out a handwritten draft of the poem To Autumn by John Keats that I found on Wikimedia Commons. Several viewers mentioned that they often see old and frequently dusty flower arrangements at their thrift stores. Here's the trick. It doesn't matter if you like the overall arrangement. Instead, focus on the individual floral stems. If you disassemble the arrangement, could you use some parts of it? Because this is a very economical way of buying faux florals. If they're dusty, clean them with some silk plant cleaner or just spray them with water and let them dry out. To create a new fall floral arrangement, I'm going to use this thrift store wire vase. I didn't care for the gray color, so to give it a more classic appearance, I spray painted it black. I also spray painted a random lid that came off of some container I used in an old DIY project. I actually have a small plastic tub full of random lids. I'm also going to use this square metal planter that I found in my stash. I didn't want to paint it black, but I did want it to coordinate with the vase. So, working on one side at a time, I lightly brushed on black chalk paint and then used a rag to wipe most of it away. The paint was drying pretty quickly, so I dipped a brush in black wax and applied that over the paint. This allowed me to smooth out any blotches in the paint and to wipe a little more of it off. Next, I cut a large piece of styrofoam to fit in the bottom of the planter. To make sure it stayed put, I cut it to fit in very snugly, and I hot glued it to the bottom of the planter. Then I covered the styrofoam with Spanish moss. Were you wondering how I was going to combine the wire vase and the planter? Well, I turned the vase upside down and shoved it inside the planter. It was a very tight fit. Then I began adding the stems from the thrift store floral arrangements. I put one branch into each of the corners. Then I stretched some of the wires apart so I could add some faux pumpkins in the center. Because these came from the pre-made arrangements, the pumpkins already had sticks on the bottom that I could actually stick into the styrofoam to hold them in place. Next, I cut apart 3 Dollar Tree leafy stems and used these to fill in any empty spots. To disguise the wire vase and make it look more like an arbor or cloche, I used Gorilla Glue to attach the lid to the bottom of the vase that was now on the top. I thought the arrangement needed one more thing, and not a bird this time. Instead, a butterfly. I found a fake butterfly in my stash and hot glued it to the top of a viney stem. Then I reached back inside the vase and stuck the end of the vine into the styrofoam. Several viewers mentioned pots and pans as a common item at their thrift stores. So I challenged myself to turn this $3 saucepan into fall decor. Since I'm not going to be using the lid, I added it to my tub of random lids. To create a base, I painted the inside edge and the entire outside of the pan with white chalk paint. I recently found these pretty autumn napkins at HomeGoods. I cut down the center between the two designs and then cut around the design, removing some of the white spaces. Once I was done trimming around the designs, I removed the 2 bottom white layers. This will leave you with a very thin piece of paper, perfect for decoupaging. To adhere the napkin to the pot, brush Mod Podge onto the sides and carefully place the napkin on top, smoothing it out first with your fingers and then using your paintbrush dipped in a little more Mod Podge. Once the entire pot is covered, brush an additional coat of Mod Podge over the top of the napkin. You can also go ahead and trim off any extra pieces of napkin. After the Mod Podge had fully dried, I used sandpaper to remove the extra napkin around the top edge. Then I added a large piece of styrofoam inside the pan and covered it with Spanish moss. I added a thrift store candle ring on top of that, using florist pins to hold it in place and attach it to the styrofoam. Then I used a few more florist pins to attach a bird's nest in the center of the candle ring. I added some additional greenery to fill out the candle ring and topped the nest with Spanish moss and a velvet pumpkin. I replaced the plastic pumpkin stem with a stick and added Spanish moss and a vine to the top of the pumpkin. And as a finishing touch, I hot glued a Dollar Tree transparent butterfly sticker to the vine. I don't know of any thrift store that doesn't have a shelf full of coffee mugs. I bought these 2 for 50 cents each. Let's see if we can turn them into some pretty fall decor. First, I cut up some faux greenery and hot glued the stems to the inside of the larger mug. Then I sat the smaller cup on top and hot glued Spanish moss in the gap between the two mugs. I filled the top mug about halfway full with a piece of styrofoam and hot glued a glass votive candle holder on top. Then I twisted some Dollar Tree pip berries around the candle cup. For additional embellishment, I hot glued some fake acorns and a small bird to the rim of the lower mug. If you're thinking, what about those mugs with logos or phrases on them? Well, I suggest covering them up by decoupaging on a cute paper label or design. I've linked 2 of my favorite autumn-themed labels in the description box. Here's another idea for upcycling old picture frames and the old artwork you find inside them. I'm using this Currier and Ives calendar print that I thrifted with no frame, but don't be afraid to remove artwork from frames that you don't like. I'm combining my art print with a thrift store wood frame. You'll want to look for a wide, flat frame similar to mine. Trim any border off your print and arrange it so that the best part of the picture is covering the face of the frame. Then trace around your frame and inside the picture opening on the back side of your print. When you're cutting out the shape, don't cut on the lines. Leave a little extra paper to ensure that it isn't too small. Apply a thin, even coat of Mod Podge on the top of the frame and on the back of the paper. Using the right amount of Mod Podge is one of the keys to a wrinkle-free finished project. Once you've placed your paper on the frame, go over the paper several times with a brayer, rolling in different directions. Wait until the Mod Podge is dry, then sand off the extra paper along the edges with a sanding block or sandpaper. To fill my frame, I printed out a phrase on another old piece of paper and cut it to fit inside. To seal the frame, brush on a very light coat of Mod Podge. A thick coat could cause the paper to bubble. After the first coat dries, you can apply a second coat for a more durable finish. You might remember that I thrifted this wood mantel clock last week for under $5. To remove the clock parts, follow the same steps as the plastic wall clock. Remove the screws on the back side, and then you can remove the glass and clock face on the front side. If I was going to use this as a clock, I would have refinished the wood. But for my idea, I painted it with moss green chalk paint. For some reason, the clock with its round opening reminded me of a fairy door or a hobbit hole. To create a wood door for the opening, I hot glued several popsicle sticks together and stained them with antiquing wax. Since I'm going to attach the door on the back side of the clock, it's not necessary to cut it into a circle shape. I just needed to trim down the corners so that it would fit on the back side of the clock. Then I just used a combination of wood glue and hot glue to attach it. It was when I was first thinking about what I could do with the inset rim around the opening on the front of the clock that I came up with the idea for the hobbit hole. because I thought a ring of rocks would look super cute. To adhere them, I decided to use caulk, which I thought would mimic the look of mortar. Caulk can be messy though, so I made sure to clean up my mistakes before they dried. To create hinges for the door, I found 2 little metal strips in my stash. I'm not sure, but I think maybe they were clamps or braces off of the back of a picture frame. For a door handle, I used a metal washer and just colored it black with a Sharpie marker. Then I ran a piece of florist wire through the washer and ran the wire to the back side of the door. I looked through my stash for anything that was small that I could possibly use to embellish the clock. Using hot glue, I attached a tree, a birdhouse, some tiny pumpkins, a piece of fencing, and a very tiny bird. I also glued on some reindeer moss in a few different spots, including between some of the rocks. I wanted to add a Tolkien quote, but I just felt paper would look out of place on this project. So instead, I cut a phrase from an IOD rub-on transfer for a more professional look. And at the last minute, I decided to distress the clock edges with some sandpaper. One viewer wrote that she's not surprised that her thrift store is suddenly full of signs with words on them. And I found this entire tub full of woodblock letters for only $3. But with a few tweaks, we can update them and turn them into cute fall decor. I used the Canva app to superimpose letters on top of a vintage fruit and vegetable design. I printed them out on regular copy paper in a size to fit the side of the blocks. Then I decoupaged them following the same steps I used on the wood picture frame. I was very careful not to use too much Mod Podge since I was adhering paper on top of paper, and I always let the Mod Podge dry between steps. For some additional embellishment, I bought this bright orange squirrel figurine at Dollar Tree that I painted with black chalk paint. When the chalk paint was dry, I brushed on white wax and then wiped most of it off. I love how the wax settles in the crevices and makes this cheap resin look like metal. I hadn't originally noticed that there was a small hole in the squirrel's foot. To fix it, I cut off a small slice of quickwood putty. You just knead it in your hands for a minute and then fill in the broken area. Once it dries, you can sand it if you need to. I just painted and waxed over the spot to make it disappear. For a pop of color, I gave him an orange ribbon. Then I glued the squirrel on top of the letter F block and added a few tiny pumpkins. I got lucky and found this orange striped pillow cover for $2, but you can use just about any thrift store pillow. Cut a piece of plain cotton fabric to the size of a piece of paper. You can tape the fabric to a piece of cardstock, but I prefer to use pixie spray, which is a temporary adhesive. Make sure there are no wrinkles and that the fabric is no larger than your piece of cardstock. Then place it in your printer and print out your desired image. And yes, I have an inkjet printer. Once printed, cut off any extra fabric, then peel the fabric from the cardstock. As an optional step, sew a straight stitch along each side about 1/4 of an inch in from the edge. Then you can pull out threads to create a rustic frayed edge. Place the fabric in your desired location on your pillow or pillow cover. To adhere it, carefully lift one edge at a time and hot glue it in place. This is such an easy way to upgrade a basic pillow. I want to thank everyone who responded to my post because you really challenged me to upcycle some unlikely items. And I did have to leave one project off because the video was getting so long. So let me know if you'd like to see another video like this and what items you'd like to see included. Thanks so much for watching. Hope to see you next week.